Good evening and thank you for joining us on The Big Story tonight. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Now tonight, the National Police Service lacks effective, coherent strategic coordination. That is the conclusion of outgoing chairperson of the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, Macharia Njeru. Njeru was speaking in Nairobi as his board handed in an end-of-term report after completing their 6-year tenure in office. In the 6 years, IPOA received over 9,000 complaints against and by the police, but managed to secure convictions in only 3 cases. Nonetheless, the inaugural board of IPOA leaves office with investigations on over 700 cases completed. In their final report, the board noted that corruption formed 45% of all the complaints that they received against the police. But the big question still lingers: is IPOA effective in its mandate? That we shall know by the end of this show. IPOA's take-home conclusion by Macharia Njeru opens the show tonight.
That the biggest problem within the National Police Service, if we're to be candid, is the management. It's a management issue that needs to be dealt with. That's our take-home. Management is a critical issue. Now, what do I mean by management? One, majority of police commanders do not have management and leadership skills, and that impacts negatively on the running of the National Police Service. That is one. Point number 2, there is no coherent strategic direction. Coherent in the sense that you can say that the police service, there's effective coordination. There's no effective coordination that is, that is there. And of course, that coherent strategic direction, which affects, again, as you've said, the running of the National Police Service.
And for this conversation tonight, I shall be talking to an outgoing IPOA board member, Tom Kagwe, who is in our town center studio, and the director of Haki Africa, Khalid Hussein, who is in our Mombasa studio, as well as Jacob Atiang of Usalama Reforms Forum, who is right here with me in studio. But before I can engage them, our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, now joins me live from Nairobi's CBD. And good evening to you, Sophia. It's good to see you. 6 years later, after the IPOA started its job, I guess the question is on how effective they've been.
Indeed. Good evening, Sharon. That is a debatable question. IPOA on its part today, as it released its end-of-term report, saying that they did the best they could under the circumstances. The inaugural board exiting office after 6 years. A new board is yet to be formed, and the DPP in that ceremony earlier urging that Parliament expedite that process to bring in a new board in place to ensure there is no gap and that investigations that are ongoing are not adversely affected. Independent Policing Oversight Authority, created following the post-election violence witnessed in Kenya 2007-2008, and this was to be able to deal with the excesses, the human rights violations by the National Police Service. Now, what we have heard today from IPOA as they submitted this report and releasing it to the public is that over 9,000 particular cases had been reported to them, and of those 9,800 cases, managing to get only 3 convictions. So that is criticism they have received since this report was made public, saying over 6 years, just 3 convictions. And time and again, Sharon, we have covered here on KTN in the media, it has widely been reported some of these incidences where officers are involved, brutality, killings of police. The IPOA meant to investigate, to bring these people to book. So they usually can, of their own motion, on their own volition, instigate and begin investigations on matters. The most high-profile case they have managed to get a conviction on just the other day was that ex-police officer, popularly known as Katito, found guilty for killing a man 6 years ago. But still, that track record on IPOA, they say they were the first in office, so the first 2 years they spent settling down, and in a sense they've also suffered, is one of the things they highlight in this report, from a high turnover of staff. So it has been a shaky term for this board. But some of the challenges as well witnessed, you'll remember the late former Interior Secretary in Kaiseri is quoted as having said at one point, as investigations were being conducted, that how can civilians oversight the police service? And so that has been one of the huge areas of concern, and one that clearly has impacted on their work because of that lack of cooperation, not having that support. But now it appears things are working different. We heard from the outgoing chair, Mr. Njeru, today, that that police and the Interior Ministry as a whole have been supporting their efforts, but still, in as far as cooperation, it remains to be one of the issues they highlighted. The chairman also saying that one of the biggest concerns as they exit office is the management of the National Police Service, saying that the superiors, the managers, the bosses of the various levels in the National Police Service lacking in managerial and leadership skills, and that has impacted in their work and the manner of which they deliver. And this will go back to usually, you know, Sharon, the entry level for one to join the National Police Service, rather low grades, and that has been an area the service has been criticized on, that it needs to be professionalized. It's not just for people who are out there, don't have anything to do, and so they give a try to the service. If they get in, then they're lucky. But you'll remember just the other day there was that whole debacle and the issue around those that have once in the service decided to improve and go to school and upscale, and as far as their academic qualifications. So the police continues to have that sharp focus on it. Right now, a very huge conversation that's going on the social media especially is the killing of a lady at a city park just a few days ago. The shot also in that incident was a man by police officers. They have recorded a statement, and they argue that they saw this car at the park. It had been there for a long period of time, and they went to knock and get to know who these individuals were, and the car sped off, and so they shot, killing this lady. So will this be a matter that IPOA will take up? We'll wait to see. But the issues around that is the police officers, what we're hearing from lawyers, should only react in that way, you know, to exchange fire or to shoot, if you like, when their lives are in danger, others' lives are put in danger as well. That's when we should see that kind of force being used. So we'll see how this matter will unfolds. But one of the other cases in the recent past as well, we've seen IPOA recommend police officer for charges to court, is following that incident in the Meru University. A student was shot. He was killed in that incident during protest. So IPOA finding that this particular officer should be charged, should be investigated, and the matter further canvassed through the legal processes. So these are some of the issues we've seen emerge. And Sharon, even us in the media have seen cases like when Miguna returned the last time, many Kenyans watching that on TV, and my colleagues brutalized in that particular incident. So has the Kenya National Police Service continued to serve as is, you know, captured in that word service, or is it still operating under force? Because remember, under the old constitution, before the 2010 constitution that we currently have, it was the Kenya Police Force. So is that force what we are still seeing in some of these instances? So these actions or inactions in the place, in the part of the police, IPOA meant to look into that, and this gap, now that we do not have a board in place, they had handed over their work to the Secretariat. What impact will it have? We're looking forward to hearing more, because tonight we do have an outgoing board member, Tom Kagwe, but indeed IPOA one that has worked, remember, in the police service as well. You have the internal affairs unit that's also meant to investigate this kind of issues. We've not seen a vibrant internal affairs unit in the police service itself, but several issues, including a review of the IPOA Act, is what the outgoing body is saying needs to be looked at going forward. Sharon.
Right. Many thanks, Sophia Wanuna, our lead reporter, just raising critical issues that I shall be engaging deeper into with my panel, both here in studio and in various parts of the city and also from Mombasa. We shall get into that discussion in just a bit. But now, let's take a quick look at some of the excerpts from that end-term report from IPOA. And we know that the Independent Policing Oversight Authority is a state authority that was created under the IPOA Act in 2011, providing for civilian oversight over the work of the police force in Kenya. And the board members had what to serve for a 6-year term, and which they have done, just handing in the end-of-term report today. And in that period, the appointed members of the board, there were 9,000 cases that were lodged with the authority, and only 4 have been successfully convicted. But we shall get into that a bit later. Let's just get to know more and who exactly made up this board that has just finished its tenure. We have Macharia Njeru, who is the outgoing chairperson, Jedaidah Ntoyai, who has been the vice chairperson, Grace Madoka, we have Vincent Kiptor, and Tom Kagwe, who is actually with us here in studio tonight for this discussion, Rose Bala, Fatuma Ali Saman, and Njeri Onyango. Those are the 8 members who have been serving in the IPOA board over these 6 years. And just to look at some of the IPOA's achievements, as they have, reported, even in that report that was released today, during this term, they have they have 164 recommendations that have been submitted, 103 files that have been forwarded to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and 64 cases that are in various stages of hearing in court. There are some of the achievements that they have, managed in the 6 years. In these 6 years also, they have managed to set up an organizational structure, and we saw the chairman quoting, especially when raised with that question of just having had 3 convictions in 6 years, stating that almost half of that period has been really spent in setting up the organization, seeing that this was the inaugural term. And during this term also, IPOA has created policies and working processes within the authority, and also recruited and training competent staff, and setting up a headquarters here in Nairobi and in regional offices. These are some of the administrative work that they say they have had to spend most of their time, or at least the formative period, engaging in. And let's take a look at some of the complaints against police that, they have managed to canvass in this term. And what really made of the highest number of complaints were cases to do with abuse of office and corruption, which made up to 45.1% of all the complaints that they have received this far. Cases of harassment by police officers followed next at 18.1%, and issues of welfare taking up 7.6%, and assault by office taking up 6.5%. Let's take a look at more cases, the nature of complaints that the body has dealt with over this time. Also, deaths associated by police at 3.3% of the complaints they have received. And we have seen a lot of cases reported, especially to do with extrajudicial and summative killings by police officers. These are some of the cases that we have. And serious injuries caused by police officers, comprising of 3.8%. We also have some of the complaints here, sexual offenses by police officers at 0.4%, and other misconducts taking up 13.8%. Right. And we want to get right now into that discussion with my panelists tonight. A very crucial body that this has been, especially as it was mandated. And Kenya's had a lot of expectations for this body, especially in terms of achieving aspired reforms within the police service. So joining me, I have Tom Kagwe, who is an outgoing board member of IPOA. He's joining us from our City Center studios. Many thanks, Mr. Kagwe, for joining us tonight. I'm also joined by Jacob Atiang, who is from the Usalama Reforms Forum. Many thanks for joining us, sir. And from Mombasa, I'm also joined by Hassan Khalid, who is the Executive Director of Mombasa-based Haki Africa. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. And I want to start with you, Mr. Kagwe, as an outgoing member of the board. One of the questions that we have seen raised by Kenyans, even as you complete your tenure, as you submitted the report today, is a very sincere question. Do you think that we needed to have this authority, IPOA? Was it a necessary body? And what can you say would not have otherwise been achieved in your absence?
I think the first thing we'll have to agree on.
So, I don't know if you can hear me, sir.
I think the first thing we have to agree. I can hear you very quietly, but let me respond. If you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Please proceed.
I think, let me say it this way. For many years, since the formation of the police in 1896, show me how many police officers who've committed gross human rights violations, who have been held to account by the police. This creation of IPOA by civil society since 2008, moving on, and then created by an act of parliament in 2011, I think one of the key things we have to agree, it would be very unfair to judge IPOA based on convictions. Judges and the judiciary is the one that convicts. We've had 3 convictions, not 4, not 2. So the basis of IPOA was to ensure that we give effect to Article 244 of the Constitution. While it is very clear to me, when I took office in June 2012, and today I exit office, working with civil society and my friend Hussein Khalid and Jacob Atiang are there, they know clearly civil society agreed, parliament agreed, the executive agreed, and Kenyans agreed. That's why Kenyans agreed to promulgate a constitution with Article 244. Police were not holding each other to account. I've stayed in police reforms for 12 years. In those years, no police officer has been convicted through police investigations for human rights abuses. Indeed, most of the investigations disappear, courtesy of either delayed investigations or them protecting each other. Then when you ask whether IPOA was needed, it is clear to me like daylight, although it's in the evening, that it was necessary to bring police to account for breaking the law the way every other Kenyan, when he breaks or she breaks the law, is held to account. Mm-hmm. So, those are my opening remarks. The existence and rationale for civilian oversight is an agreed upon proposition, not only just in Kenya, but all over the world. all democracies, and as today's His Excellency Robert Godek said, all democracies, even with monopoly of violence, held by the police and the military, somebody must hold to account the use of that monopoly of violence. Kenya is a democracy, has a democratic constitution, just like the United States of America, just like every other democracy. We have to agree to be set by the same rules. Human rights standards and fundamental freedoms are universal. They are not context specific. So when Africans are killed by fellow Africans, it's the same way Americans, when their police kill their own, they are held to account. So we are not children of a lesser God. Mm-hmm. The work done by Hussein in the question of counter-terrorism and the work done by Jacob Etienne in Usalama reforms, it is essential. But IPOA was given the legal mandate and state power to investigate. Then we pass off the files to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to prosecute police. It is difficult, and there is a very high threshold of evidence against murder or manslaughter. Today, I will end by saying the following as my opening remarks. Titus Ngamau Musila is serving 15 years in jail for killing, for murder, killing with intent. Veronica Gitahi and Isa Muzee, those are two cops also. They are serving 7 years for killing a minor, Kwekwe Mwandaza, in Kwale. When you ask whether IPOA was needed, and police to date, in those 6 years have been in office, have never prosecuted, have never even gotten a conviction of anyone. I think the answer, my dear friend, is clear, like daylight.
All right. And I want to engage Mr. Khalid on the same, because your institution, your organization really handles so many of such cases, especially in Mombasa, where we've seen so many cases reported of extrajudicial killings. How has your engagement with IPOA been, and how would you rate, especially their contribution to police reforms this far? Right. Let me repeat that, Mr. Khalid. As someone who deals a lot with cases of extrajudicial killings and human rights protection in Mombasa, how has your engagement been with IPOA, and how would you rate their performance this far?
Thank you very much, and a very, very important topic that we're discussing today. I think for us as Haki Africa and civil society in general, I would say the 6-year term have been bittersweet. Bittersweet in that we are very happy and very encouraged that IPOA has been able to assert its authority on issue of police impunity. I think they have been at the forefront to demand that police accountability be enforced by all means. We've seen how they've campaigned and advocated for their right to investigate, for their right to ensure that police are able to account for their terms in office. Bitter in that despite the 6-year period, unfortunately, the agency was not able to build its capacity to a level that Kenyans would have said is good enough. I think they faced very many challenges. As an agency, we know there were, efforts to try and curb their powers by amending the laws. We've seen lack of resources being made available to the agency. So, unfortunately, despite the period, despite their assertion and their authority to investigate police, they haven't been given the opportunity to address all the matters conclusively. As you can see, the numbers that are reflected compared to the number of issues that they've been able to receive is a far cry from what Kenyans actually really want and really expected. So I think for civil society, we're extremely happy with the first term, and if we were to rate, we would give them around 60% because they've been able to at least show that there's an agency that is demanding accountability, that there's an agency that is saying we cannot have impunity of the police in this country. But again, the issue of capacity has been a problem for the agency and for us as civil society in general.
Right. And Mr. Atiang, from the Usalama Reforms Forum, would you say that the authority has been on to a good start, given the kind of challenges that we have seen even reported of interference, of resistance and all that? Would you say that we've seen the authority form a good base of operation going forward?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, I want to join my colleagues in congratulating the inaugural board of IPOA in the sense that, as Tom Kagwe has rightly put it, this was the first board that was put in place. In 2012, they came to office. They took up office, I think, around June 2012. And if you look at the landscape in terms of police reforms, this is the first institution that was, given the opportunity to look at the issues of accountability, to look at the issues of oversight of the National Police Service. So anybody who would want to look at IPOA, I think the first thing is we need to appreciate the work that the board did for 6 years in the circumstances that Hussein has been able to elaborate, in the sense that I think we have been given enough information for about close to 2 years. The inaugural board set up itself in the sense of setting up the institution, and I think that took quite a bit of time, even though for the general public, the board has been in office for 6 years. So it was important that, one, the board sets down and begins to really make the institution run, which they did. Once they hit the road, I think there were quite a bit of expectations from the public, which is expected, that IPOA would swing in action immediately they were sworn in office. They took quite a bit of time. But also, it's also important to note that, it is the first time in the Kenyan history that we have an institution that is oversighting the work of the National Police Service. And all of us are aware that there have been quite a bit of reports around the excesses of the police that range from human rights abuses, issues of lack of compliance, issues of lack of professionalism, issues of lack of accountability. So it was a road that everyone who was traveling had to travel with the challenges that we see. So I think I would want to say, yes, we would rate the board. They performed well, fairly well, above average, about 65% in my view. But also not to forget the fact that there were a lot of external forces that were really trying to look at IPOA as an enemy of the National Police Service. For a long time, we took quite a bit of time as civil society to convince, government agencies, to convince the general public that IPOA was coming in for the common good, one, of the National Police Service, but two, and more importantly, the common good of the general public, which is the citizenry in Kenya. So the relationship between IPOA and the National Police Service, I think, wasn't quite very good, to be honest, in the initial stages. And the National Police Service Commission, as it were, also, we needed quite a bit of good relationship between those three institutions as anchored in law to begin to help issues of accountability.
All right.
And let me also mention, as we go to the next step, that the work of IPOA is largely external accountability. There's a lot of work that needs to be done internally by what we call internal affairs unit. We will be able to discuss that as well.
Come back to that, Mr. Atiang, because at least we've now understood the opening remarks and most of it on the positive side, you rating the work by IPOA for their first tenure as being above average. And we shall then be looking at some of the specific challenges that the body may have faced that can and need to be looked into going forward to increase the effectiveness of the body. But right now, let's take a short break here on The Big Story before we come back with that detailed conversation.